Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are going to be discussing near death experiences, essentially, people who have died, crossed over to the other end, saw what it was like, and returned to tell the story about it. Some fascinating stories and accounts, and a lot of similarities between different people all around the world. This is not isolated, this is a very large thing. And we are joined by our friend Mindy Tautfest, who has experience in near death experience, and she's going to give it an explanation from her perspective, as well as some of the things she's learned. And she's also written a book about this. So we're going to get into all of it. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to die and come back, today is the show for you. So let's get into it. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Quantum Ladder Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me as always, my good friend and co-host, Mr. Marquise Williams.
What's up, Louis? This is going to be another fun episode. We get to talk to somebody. I love when we get guests because we get to pick somebody else's brain from the outside on some of these topics. So I'm excited about this one. I'm really excited about this one. And I know the audience is going to be excited too. So
sure. It's one thing to discuss a topic, especially something as personal as a near-death experience. You really want to speak to somebody who has gone through that. There's only so much us as researchers can do, but better to hear it directly from the source. So thank you to everybody out there listening right now in the world of YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and the UNX Network. If you want to watch this live every Thursday at 9 p.m. is where you can find us. And of course, the replay is always available. And before we get into things, we want to say today's show is sponsored by our good friends at H2 Water Expert. If you don't filter your water, you become the filter for your water. If you want to learn more about hydrogen therapy or proper filtration, check out h2waterexpert.com. And without further ado, we will bring on today's guest. She is the state director of MUFON, Oklahoma. She is a near-death experiencer. She's been on shows like Ancient Aliens on television and some more projects coming out later this year. She's an awesome lady to have around. She's one of our favorites. So welcome to the show, Mindy Tautfest.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. So
you are correct you here. I'm no longer the Oklahoma State Director of MUFON. I am the National Director of Training. So I've been promoted.
You've had a promotion. So
I have. Yeah.
Good for you.
We now have a new director here in Oklahoma named Mike Six, and he's a 30-year law enforcement. He was a Marine pilot and all kinds of stuff. He's wonderful. So Oklahoma's in good hands, and I'm on to other things now with training new investigators. So
amazing. Yeah, well, congrats. I mean, you're very well deserving of that. You always put in the effort. You're always factual. You don't just sort of shoot from the hip, and you have a certain professionalism about you that the topic deserves. And I think a lot of people could learn from that. There's a lot of people just kind of making, entertaining content, not necessarily factual. So kudos to you for keeping it real and for your promotion. So for anyone who doesn't maybe know you or hasn't seen you on TV or anything like that, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us your experience and what led to you, writing a book about it and helping other people with theirs.
Well, I'll just jump right in with what led up to the near-death experience. At the time, it was 2016 when we moved out to the family farm. It was about a 300-acre wheat farm there in northern Oklahoma where my father-in-law lived. And he was having some health problems. So he had asked for my husband to come back out and kind of help around the farm, tending to the cattle and whatnot. And so the only place out there really was like this little flimsy trailer house that was across the street. And so that's where we ended up having to move into until we could build a house of our own out there on the family land. So that's kind of the setting where we were. We were in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was about 30 miles away. And so it was just me and my trailer. The day that I had my aneurysm, it started off, I woke up that morning and my face was a little bit swollen. And it was the day of the US presidential election between Trump and Hillary. And so we were excited. We wanted to go vote. We wanted to teach our kids about voting. They were 6 and 8 at the time. So they were still real young. It was going to be the first time, actually letting them go with us and get their little sticker and whatnot. And we were a very, very deeply religious family. My husband was a Southern Baptist minister. We had traveled all over the state of Oklahoma preaching the gospel, and we had our nightly Bible studies, and we raised our kids up in the ways of the Lord. So we were very devout Christian at this time. So I get up that morning. At the time, my husband was working at the local school, which it was like a one-room school, one building school for K through 12, just out in the middle of the country. So he would drive the school bus in the morning. He coached basketball and football and everything, and he would take the kids with him on the school bus to and from school. And they had left out early that morning before I had gotten up and discovered kind of that swelling that was going on. So I took a picture and I sent it to my husband, and I said, hey, something's not quite right. I might be having like an allergic reaction or something. I had an underlying condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which was a genetic connective tissue disease. And it can cause, all kinds of stuff. One of the things related to it is allergic reactions. And so that's really what I thought I was dealing with. My husband said, well, why don't you take a Benadryl, go jump in the shower, see if that, relieves it some, comes down. I wasn't in any pain. So it wasn't any big bother to me, really. So I do what he says. And as I'm getting out of the shower, I go and sit on the couch, and I'm looking to see if there's any early exit polls coming out. Because by this time, it's probably 4:30 in the afternoon. I'd just kind of gone about my day and, no big deal. As I was sitting there, that's when I hear this loud gunshot go off inside of my head. And instantly, my first thought was that I had been shot through that little flimsy trailer house. There had been coyote hunters out around the area in the days prior. So I thought, oh my God, they've shot through this flimsy house and shot me in the head. And so prior to this, I had been an ICU nurse before I had my children and everything. So I was trained as a nurse. So I started trying to assess, my ABCs, what's going on. I tried to focus on the back of my head to see if maybe I had blood running down the back of my head. And I couldn't notice it. So I couldn't figure out where exactly the trauma had happened. And so then my thoughts turned to, okay, this has got to be an aneurysm. And knowing my connective tissue disorder, almost everyone on my father's side has died of an aneurysm. So I knew that was more than likely what we were dealing with. And this all happens within a flood of seconds that you're trying to, it's almost like your thoughts speed up, you're trying to assess really quickly, because I knew I was in immediate danger. I was there by myself, and I knew that this was a very critical thing that had just happened. So as soon as I realized, okay, this is probably an aneurysm, the next thing I feel is like an electrical avalanche is the best I can describe it. And it was like a peeling away from the top of my head down to my feet. And it was like a peeling away. It was horrific pain. So I start turning inwards. I feel my head kind of bobbing, and I said, okay, I'm dying, like right now. And I look at the front door. I have it open. I'm waiting for my kids to come in and give me hugs and kisses and tell me all about their day. And I mean, I just had like a flood of thoughts of my children coming in and discovering my body. And so I immediately start turning to prayer. God, please do not let me be the worst thing to ever happen to my kids. Don't let them discover my body. And then I'm thinking of my husband. My husband's not going to do well with it. You know, he's so tenderhearted. He's never going to get over this either. And so I'm in deep, deep prayer. God, if I can survive this, please let me survive this. That was my worst fear, was them finding my body. So as I'm reflecting and praying in deep, deep prayer, the next thing I do is I stop and I looked around. And that's when I realized I was surrounded in darkness. My first instinct there, I realized, okay, I wasn't in any pain. I wasn't in any distress. So I was trying to figure out where I was. My first instinct was to put my hand out in front of my face. And that's what you see on the cover of the book, is that hand in the darkness, because I was trying to determine if it was dark or if there was just nothing there where I was. And I couldn't see my hand. So my next instinct was to start clapping. So I started clapping and I couldn't. And that's when the realization really sunk in. I'm dead. I've completely crossed over. I didn't have the leaving of the body that some people have, where they can actually see themselves or anything. I think I was in such distress and in such deep prayer, I didn't even notice whenever I left. I didn't know until I was already there. So my next thing that I'm doing, I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, okay, maybe my loved ones will come. I'm waiting for my grandpa and my grandma to come greet me. I'm waiting for Jesus to come and get me. I'm waiting for a tunnel of light. And I'm thinking, okay, you know, I can deal with this. I've passed. Now comes the good part. And I kept waiting and nothing would happen. Nobody came. And so the longer I'm sitting there, the more distressed I am, because I'm trying to figure out why. Where is everybody? You know, why am I left alone? And this is one aspect where I've gotten some criticism from the Christian community, where they're saying, well, maybe you weren't really saved. You weren't, you know, you didn't have enough faith. And I want to stop that right now and say, I had perfect faith. I was so expectant. I was waiting on my Savior. Everything in me was waiting and desiring heaven. And I had put my full faith in Christ that he would come for me. That's why it was so soul crushing for me whenever he did not show, because that's all I had over there. That's what I had always believed. Jesus will come for me. You know, I'm over in his domain now. And it didn't happen. As much as I wished it would have, it did not. And I don't think that it was any lack of faith on my part. I don't think that it was any evil doing on my part. And that's something we can get into later, with kind of the repercussions of having this kind of an encounter, back on this side of the plane. But as I was sitting there waiting, I started doing it. What I didn't get a life review. I ended up having more of kind of an internal reflection of myself. And I'm wondering, what has separated me? Why am I not allowed into heaven? What's wrong? I was even waiting for judgment, you know, and I was praying, God, you know, please let Jesus be my righteousness. I can't make it in without him. Obviously, I've done something to separate me. You know, be my righteousness so I can get in. And I'm there. I'm just kind of looking over my life and what I could have done that could have separated me from a savior that I had put full faith in my entire life. I didn't understand. And so as I sat there, the distress just kept growing. because I almost felt like I was a spectacle. I could feel the source all around me. And this is another thing that some people will say, is that the void is void of anything. But for me, that's not how it was. The void was full of every aspect of um, reality. I mean, it was the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. It was an immense force. God was. It wasn't a man in the sky. It was this force that surrounded me, but I was separate from. And so, me being separate from it, I was separate from everything. And that again was a whole nother level of distress, because I had just lost my husband and kids. I had just lost my earthly life. I had no savior there for me. And I was alone. I was terrified. I thought I was going to be there forever. And do you want me to stop? I think
No,
we lost
no,
Marquis.
it's okay. Marquise, I think, is having some technical difficulty. He just messaged me. He's going to log out and log back in. We're all good. But I wanted to
Okay.
ask you, did you have, like, I've heard other stories where people have described like a life review where their life kind of flashes before their eyes, almost like the old like Charles Dickens or like the Christmas tale where the ghost of Christmas past shows you around, like these are all the people that you wronged, and this
Right.
is how these people's lives were negatively or positively affected, kind of variations of a life review. Did you have anything like that with your experience?
Well, that's what I was saying. Mine isn't necessarily a life review. It was more of an internal reflection, just trying to figure out what had separated me, why I didn't end up in heaven, because I thought that I was a good Christian. I thought that I had, put full faith. Everything in me was Christian. Everything in me led me to believe that I would end up in heaven. And that's why it was such a shock to me and why it was so distressing for me. The environment itself was not distressing at all. It was the lack of response that was distressing. So in my hi Marquise.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Just
You were
glitched
you
on
were
me.
freezing in various action poses
Yeah,
for
you
the last
were.
10 minutes.
It was kind of fun to watch, but you were entertaining.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, you're
Sorry.
fine. So we're discussing the life review. I
Right.
didn't have a life review like a lot of people do. And the life review is actually a really important aspect of what a lot of people end up in countering on the other side, because they describe having a chance to feel situations from other people's perspectives. They know how they made that other person feel because they're living it as that other person. And it almost carries on to where you understand the connections between people, and you don't want to wrong people, because you understand in doing that you're wronging yourself, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting the whole of humanity by doing this stuff. So you really, people that have that kind of a life review, it changes them profoundly in that way, that they come back and they're very cautious about their actions because they understand the repercussions, for years and years to come, of what it can do to people, and how that, then reflects on humanity. So mine
So
was not that
is
in
this sort
depth.
of like the biblical description of like a purgatory? Do you think maybe you were kind of in like a no man's land or a middle state, not necessarily the final destination, i.e., heaven or hell or whatever that looks like, but do you feel like because you didn't fully cross over, maybe you were in some kind of a stasis or a middle state, and that's why it didn't feel familiar or what you had envisioned? Or do you just think that that was how it actually is for everybody? It's just your, Christian upbringing that told you it would be a certain way, and it wasn't 100% that way.
Well, I don't feel like I was in purgatory. I don't feel like I was under any kind of judgment. And again, we can get into that much more deeply. I think that I was in an incredible place. If I would have been raised Buddhist, I would have known that I was in nirvana. I had
Mhm.
reached the highest heaven. And with what I returned with, which, like I said, once we get into that portion of the story, it'll explain a little more about my feelings about where I was. At the time, I didn't understand, but now doing all of the investigation my, on different religions, on just where I stood on things. There are so many traditions around the world that start with this area of darkness, whether it was none or chaos or, any number of different void-like places. That's what existed prior to anything. And that's exactly where I was. And that's what I felt around me, was that whole potential for being, the whole potential for existence. Everything came out of that source that I was surrounded by. But again, me being separate from it, how soul crushing. I couldn't do anything to take my mind off of my misery and my confusion and my fear, because I couldn't even twiddle my thumbs. I couldn't turn on TV. There was nothing to look at. There was nothing to take my misery away. I had to sit with it. And it was so amplified because that's all I was my thoughts and my feelings floating in this darkness. So let me jump back into the story here a little. After I had started reflecting, I thought, have I not loved others enough? And I'd never struggled with that. I loved people just fine. But when I asked myself if I loved myself, that's where the deep realization came in, that I had to learn to love myself, to live my purpose, and to fully love others, and a deeper understanding than what I ever did. Once I had that realization, that's whenever the entity showed up over my left shoulder. And it was definitely a male figure, but it was not a deity. It wasn't an angel. It wasn't even human. And he showed me kind of a reluctant kindness, like he was not supposed to be intervening, but my distress was at such a level that he said, I'm going to peek in here and just end this for her. And whenever he did, he told me straight to my mind, you are not going to be here forever. And I was instantly relieved, because I thought, okay, someone else is here and I'm not here forever. So these are two major things that I was concerned about that was finally relieved in that moment. And as soon as he did that, we started sailing off to the left. It's like he led, and like I was, attracted with him over to the left. And as we went over, that's when I started seeing that purple glow in the distance. And as we got closer and closer, I saw the pink lines connecting everything in there. And it joined up and glowed bright yellow, where all these lines intersected. And as I got closer and closer, it just gave off immense peace and love. And he told me that's the fabric of humanity. And I sat there just in complete awe, because it was so important. Like it had the utmost importance. And what came to me was like, it was almost like a collection of souls, and all of the goodness had been collected there within that nebula. It looked like the cosmic web, if you've seen a picture of it. I've seen that since, and I thought, I went and grabbed my husband. I said, that's what I saw. I had before described it as a map of brain neurons, but they look exactly the same.
Yeah.
So that's what he had shown me. And I wanted to go towards it, and he knew I did, but he kind of indicated, no, it's not for you. And when he did that, we sailed off further to the left, and I was instantly inserted back in my body. Now, when I came to, I was slumped over on the couch, and we had what I finally, 2 years later, understood was a vertebral artery dissection, which is one of the main arteries that goes into your brain. There were two giant rips in it, and somehow it clotted off enough to bring me back. I had had a stroke, and so my right arm was completely limp. My speech was slurred. I was laying over on the couch and trying to find my phone. I kept trying to sit up, and I kept falling over, and, just in a panic. My head was ringing, worst headache you ever had. it felt like lava flowing through my skull. And everything was muffled, and I had lost 90% of my hearing due to the aneurysm. I was able to find my phone and call my father-in-law, who was right across the street, and within minutes, he was standing in my front room. And shortly, I mean, within minutes after him coming in, my husband and children arrived home. And you know, I knew then, okay, I'm going to get to medical treatment. So they loaded me up and drove me 30 miles away to the nearest small town hospital, who did one scan, and they said, your neck probably shifted, because over the course of the time I was there, the feeling was coming back in my arm, my speech was starting to clear, and they thought maybe I had a pinched nerve. They sent me home, and I said, no, this was severe. Something happened. And this unfortunately turned into a 2-year quest of them sending me home repeatedly, acting like I was a drug seeker, sending me to my neurologist, who said, you have migraines that look like strokes. Take a bath, relax, quit coming to the hospital. And so that's what I would do. And I had multiple strokes following this, where I sat in the bathtub with my arm limp and just crying, you know, because I couldn't get any help. So this went on for 2 years, and I was nearly passing out every day. I was living in my own personal hell, because I was locked in this body that was constantly trying to kill me, and terrified of going back to the void. I did not talk about my near-death experience for the first 2 years. I didn't think. During the period right after I had my aneurysm, I did move in with a friend from church, because she lived right next to the hospital. And so, and I'd only met her maybe 3 times, and she said, come live with me. I'm right next to the hospital, you know. And we sat up and we had TV marathons and stuff at night. But I guess she said I was waking up having terrible nightmares. And so she would get up and sit with me, and I would pause the TV, I guess, and turn to her and start telling her about the void. I have no memory of this, but she has, you know, full memory of all the little glimpses and weird things I was doing at the time. But that was a really horrible time to have to leave my husband and my kids. I cried every night. I remember crying just from that separation, because I was dealing with the physical repercussions of what I had been through, the mental repercussions, trying to piece together my spirituality that had just completely crumbled in front of me. I was broken in every way a person could be broken. So finally, after 2 years of this kind of suffering, we packed up and we moved to Oklahoma City. And that was the turning point. I'm originally from Oklahoma City, so I was coming back home. So, you know, just jumped right back into it. We had bought a house here, you know, near the hospital, one of the bigger hospital systems here in the city. And it was really kind of divine intervention what happened after that, because we had got a Roku stick. We hadn't got our DVR or anything set up at the time, you know, so we were just watching stuff on Roku. And they had the little 30-second commercials you have to watch. Every single one was for Integris Baptist Medical System, which is right down the road. And they were having a deal that was like Heroes of the Hospital, and, you know, finding out these medical mysteries. And sure enough, I mean, beyond chance, there was a young blonde ICU nurse who had gotten up and gotten in the shower, leaned back and heard an explosion in her head, and she fell to the ground and her arm went limp and she was slurring her speech. And I thought, oh my God. And it's like, you know, to find out more, visit our website. So, you know, I'm pulling it up as quick as I can. And come to find out, I watched the rest of it. She had had a vertebral artery dissection. And this is something I had never heard of, being a nurse. But I contacted that doctor, and within 2 weeks, I was in getting the proper, you know, assessment, the right kind of test. They had to run a wire up into my brain and everything. but that's where they finally found it. And I remember the radiologist, he took a picture on his own personal cell phone because they don't see it very often. And he showed it to me. He said, we found it. We found it. You've got 2 big rips there in your vertebral artery. And I cried, because I knew finally we know what has happened. And we knew the instance of if it would repeat or not, because that had been one of my biggest fears, was if this happens again, I don't think I'll survive. So again, it was kind of like a divine intervention there to get me to where I needed to go. That was kind of the turning point. At 2018, I ended up back in the hospital in the neuro step down because I had another rip. And my blood pressure was hovering 40/20. I wasn't doing good. Told my husband, we need to look at funeral arrangements. Mom has a plot over here. At the time I was 38. So, I mean, that's not something you want to speak with, you don't want to be thinking about that in your 30s. And you got young kids, and I was trying like hell to hang on, but we needed to not ignore, reality. So we were looking, this is where the burial plot is. This is who I want in our children's lives, to be a strong female figure. Just different funeral arrangements, things that I wanted, songs to be played, whatever. And so my husband said, what do you want to do while you're here? What can I do for you? What can we do to make happy memories for the kids? And I said, I want to go to Roswell. And so he said, okay, we'll do it. And so he looked up when the festival was that summer and planned it out. And so we went to Roswell, and he knew this was part of when me and my husband had first met. He knew I was having, problems with hauntings and shadow people and stuff like that, and had questions about it. And then he had messaged me on MySpace, back in the MySpace days. And I know. And I said, oh, you're a preacher. I'd love to talk to you and ask you about some of these weird things that I've been going through since childhood and why they won't go away. And so that's why we had even met up in the first place, was to discuss these kinds of things. So he knew that my life had always been a little more weird than the traditional Christian. So it wasn't any surprise to him. I had always had a deep, deep interest in UFOs, and was the kid that was riding my bike down to the bookmobile to get every UFO book I could get. And I wasn't watching cartoons. I was watching sightings and, unsolved mysteries, the unexplained, anything I could find, even from a very young age. So Roswell really was the dream. So anyways, we go out to Roswell, and I got to meet all the speakers. I still was in terrible health, still about passing out and everything. But I was amazed that you could walk up to the booths and actually talk to the speakers. I had never been to a convention like this before. So it was mind blowing and just a dream come true. So one of the speakers that was there was Kathleen Martin, she's the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. You guys both know.
Yep.
She, Betty and Barney had the big abduction case out in the Northeast in the 60s. So she was a speaker there, and she had recently started the experiencer resource team for MUFON. And I had heard of MUFON before. I had thought about joining them years before, but I thought, well, I'm not a police officer. I'm not military. I don't know if I really have anything to offer. Talked myself out of it. But then meeting Kathleen, I was speaking to her more about finding out about quantum healing hypnosis technique to try to start integrating my near-death experience. And I was trying to be kind of quiet about it because I still hadn't told my husband about the near-death experience. But I was wanting to find out about it healing trauma, which my husband knew I had physically. And so in speaking with her, I thought, MUFON, man, I need to revisit this. So on the way home, I'm pulling up MUFON, and my husband's driving, and I'm just reading everything off the website. And I'm like, man, we need to go to some meetings. We need to see if they have them in Oklahoma. So I called up to headquarters, and I ended up talking with Doug Wilson, who was director of investigations at the time. And this is like number 2 or 3 guy in the whole organization. And he sits on the phone for like 2.5 hours with me, answering every question. And he said, well, we don't have people in Oklahoma, but we need people. And, you know, if you want to be an investigator, we can train you. And I said, okay, sign me up. I was concerned about having to go out and like visit people. But when you're first starting out, most of it's online. So I was like, well, I got a computer. So, you know, I could take a nap in between if I need it, and I can work on it when I feel good. And so I did. I jumped in both feet, and within a year became state director here. And then within another year is whenever I was bumped up to director of training with MUFON, and you know, undertook the MUFON University, and getting together a whole training platform for training new investigators. So that's kind of been my journey from the near death into the UFO side of things. And now I'm part of the experiencer resource team to help other encounters or other experiencers with their encounters.
So it's like the bird's eye view of your life experiences there.
There
right?
you go.
There's a lot that give me so many questions, and I want to preface what I do with everybody. I tend to ask very deep and philosophical questions. I apologize if they are too deep. They're just ponderings. I pontificate a lot. But I want to know first, because you at the beginning of your your history, your experiences, you talked about when you had this experience where you heard the loud bang, and then you started to kind of go into this near-death experience. You during that experience, you saw lights of some kind. I believe they were purple at first. This is towards the end of the experience. You saw the purple lights and pink connected lights. You also mentioned that there was a person or an entity that was there. That was kind of over your shoulder. That there was a presence that you could sense was a male figure. My question is, do you think that it was a positive entity, or do you think that it was an indifferent one? And then there's a 2-part question. My second part to that question is, what are your thoughts on the idea that experience of almost exactly of whether they be lights or the near-death experiences where there's a figure or an entity there that kind of guides you through this experience towards the end back to this life, tends to be something that could be, or it could be, a way to keep us here. And it might not be a positive thing to keep us on this earth in a state of what we call suffering.
Right. Well, I think he wasn't necessarily good or bad. I think he was a very neutral figure. I feel like he knew about me, and was there to help guide. So spirit guide or something, sure. I'm not willing to like put a name on it because I couldn't identify him. I didn't necessarily know him, but he knew me, and he was trying to ease my suffering, but from a very calm standpoint. And as far as like sending me back, I was begging to come back.
Yeah, of course.
You know,
Of course.
for me, this isn't a sentence or anything. I think it's a gift to be here. And I was not ready to let go of that gift. You know, I wanted to see my kids grow old and, you know, experience life with my husband. And like I said, I was one that was begging to come back. You know, whenever I do end up over there, finally, you know, for once and for all, then that'll be my time. But I did not feel like it was my time. And so from the moment that aneurysm ruptured, boy, I was fighting to come back here with all my might.
So before we go to our halfway break, I want to ask you, do you think it was did you have some influence on that, or it just wasn't meant to be? Or do you really think that you were going there and you sort of willed yourself back on this side?
You want me to answer that now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I think that it was just predetermined. And like I said, we can get into that even. I think that where I went and when I went was predetermined. I was supposed to go directly to the void. That's where I would get my deepest understanding and learning in. It would have been a whole different Mindy if I would have returned from going to heaven and having everything I wanted. This facilitated much more deeper exploration and soul searching than a heaven scenario. And if I would have gone to hell, I think I would have been a basket case. So where I was exactly what I needed. And I can see the wisdom in it now.
Awesome. Fascinating story. We're gonna cover more. Marquise, anything quick before we go to our break?
Yeah, I apologize. I need to clarify. My question I don't think it was very clear. And I apologize for that. There was an episode of Star Trek a long time ago. This is old school, okay? Where one of the pilots, one of the crew members, she ends up dying. And when she dies, she meets this person, this figure that she recognizes. And there's a light in the background, kind of like a tunnel. And he's kind of offering her everlasting life and peace and this very, very positive, eternity of experiences for her. But she resists it. And ultimately, come to find out, it's actually an alien race that their whole purpose or their kind of thing is that they wait for people, human beings specifically, to die, beings all across the universe to die, and our spirit or whatever it is that we have, soul or whatever continues on. They stop us so they can feed off of our soul. And so I kind of went with that idea that I literally, it's been circulating all over Twitter lately. So I figured it's a relevant question to ask in the moment. That's where I got that question from, for the most part, is the idea that I've heard this in the UFO community, in the near-death experience community, in the spirituality community, that there's a theory that when we die, there's entities waiting for us to kind of reincarnate, and to keep cycling back and forth into this reality versus going to wherever you're talking about, which seems very different to what I've heard anyway, which could be a positive place.
Right. Well, and are you speaking of like the soul recycler that's supposed to be on the moon and everything?
Yeah, yes. She knows about
exactly,
this stuff.
I know exactly what you're talking about. But I didn't get any sense like that when I was over there. This entity was it didn't wish me malice or goodness. It was very neutral. And besides intervening to try to calm my fears and then revealing this amazing fabric of humanity to me. I don't know why he showed it to me, other than to bring that knowledge back here and share it with others, because it's another piece of the puzzle of what happens after this life and what, back to our full existence, the nature of our existence. And that's something I get into in the later chapters of my book, as I returned with a whole feeling like I had re-entered the matrix, that I had been inserted into a holographic simulation here. And it took years for me to reintegrate my mind and my consciousness back into this reality, even though I wanted to be here. It's almost as if I could see everything in ones and zeros.
Wow. It's amazing. I mean, you read about it, you hear, some tales, but when you actually hear it in depth from somebody who's really put in the work to understand it and make sense of it, it's far more strange. It's cool, but not cool. It's, something to look forward to, but also terrifying. It's just the whole, realm of all of it together. It's quite the thing. And I hope it never happens to me. But in the second half, we want to get your perspective on how it's changed your life, sort of how you viewed the whole process of death and what you thought it would be like versus what it was really like. So we'll go through all that. We'll take our 5-minute break. Everybody refill your coffees, and we'll see you all back here in 5. And we are back with the second half of Quantum Matter Podcast. Welcome to it, everybody. If you're just joining us, we're chatting with our friend Mindy Tautfest about her near-death experience. And now I wanted to ask you, a lot of people who describe their experience, when they come back, they say, you know, it was wonderful, it's nothing to fear. But you mentioned this void that was not comfortable, and the fear, was it the separation from your family, or was it just the void gives you that feeling of sort of not good, not warm, loving, happy? So how has your perspective changed on what you thought death would be like versus what you actually went through?
Right. Well, I don't think that the void, and I've said this before, it did not wish me any harm. I was not distressed when I got there. I wasn't distressed when I left there. My distress came from within myself because I did not understand where I was. And the feeling of separation from everything in creation was overwhelming. I think that would crush anybody spiritually, to be completely disconnected from everything, and not understanding why. So my feelings about it, yes, it's changed. I know in the moment when I was there, I was inconsolable, and there was nothing to console me while I was there. It literally was void of any kind of comfort. So, it was more sterile than it was mean, or bad or harmful. Um, so my thoughts on the void have changed over time, being able to separate myself from the overwhelming feeling I had during that time. I can now see the wisdom in it, because it, like I was starting to say before, it really was what I needed to course correct me. Mindy going to heaven, I wouldn't have changed a thing. I would have come back and praise God, I'm saved and I know where I'm going. I would have had no problem. Going to hell, I would have been a basket case. I would have been terrified the rest of my life. I have too high of anxiety to have to try to pick that apart. So I'm very thankful that's not what I had. The void was a good neutral place where I think that I needed that reality check. I needed that stop in my life. And I do think it was predetermined for me to go specifically to the void. So I would ask the right questions, and I would, correct myself, my spirit, where it needed to be. For as, I was a good person before. I was a good Christian. I love people and everything, but there is so much more. There are so much deeper levels of loving people that I didn't understand. So much deeper level of loving myself that I didn't understand. Had it not been for that reality check in the void, I never would have gotten there as quickly as I have, at least. And it ended up course correcting me in my, life ventures and stuff. Before being, very highly religious, I didn't want to embarrass my husband looking into UFOs and stuff. I don't know how small town, Oklahoma churches would look at it. And I see you smiling.
Probably not that great.
Right. And so it was kind of a sacrifice for me.
Which,
Yes, exactly. So, it enabled me to go ahead and pursue that in a way that I knew that I always was supposed to. Even though I had no idea, how do you get into UFO investigations? That you can't go to college for it. You can now. You can go to MUFON University, but before, I mean, how do you even get started? I want to be an expert on UFOs. Well, good luck with that. Join the FBI or so it really led me to where I needed to be, where I always knew I was supposed to be, but had no clue how to get there. Let me go ahead and back up some, if you guys don't mind,
Sure.
and pick up where I left off after the near-death experience. 2 years after, had my, trip to Roswell, came back. I was suffering terribly with PTSD from the physical side of things. I finally had gotten hearing aids, which thank God, because I couldn't hear anything. Obviously losing 90% of my hearing. I was trying to learn how to read lips, and it greatly decreased my ability just to survive in a normal capacity. So I had gotten my hearing aids, but they would make little noises. They would switch over, where it would zone in on someone speaking in front of me, and I would think that something had changed in my head, and I would freak out thinking that I'm having another aneurysm. Or the kids would, drop a cup or something, and I would freak out. I'm like, my God, you can't do that, and they're little kids, and here I'm just on edge. So another divine intervention happened where the school my husband was working at here in the city, one of his teacher friends had just gotten her counseling license, and she was going to be quitting teaching and moving into counseling. And we had asked her about references for, Christian counselors. And out here, they were very expensive for a teacher's salary. So we couldn't do it. And I said, okay, well, I'm just going to have to suffer through it, I guess. And she said, no, absolutely not. I'll drive over on my lunch break every Tuesday. I still wasn't driving because I was afraid of passing out behind the wheel. So she did. This beautiful woman left school each day in the middle of her school day from teaching to come over and listen to me cry for an hour and walk me through and trying to give me some grounding exercises and stuff.
What's her number? Because I need help.
Well, I know, right? Wonderful person. I've been blessed with some really wonderful people. For as many people as I lost during this process, I gained some really true friends. And I wouldn't trade it. But she did. She came over. She talked to me for a year. That she came over and walked me through things. And I finally got to the point where I said, I want to tell you about something. I'm finally ready to talk about the near-death experience. And I had started kind of looking up online, and I called it the dark abyss because I didn't know it was called the void. And, dying and going to the abyss, or, just trying to find anything. And I had come across IANS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And so I kind of just, bookmarked it and went on. Texted her and said, this Tuesday, let's talk about it. I've got some deep things to discuss on another level to try to process this. And I want to be able to tell John, my husband, about it. And then the pandemic hit. So we weren't using Zoom a lot and everything at that time. And so I waited for several weeks, and it was just overwhelming. Was so crushed in every way. I was trying to start to get my physical side under control, my responses to that, but the spiritual, that was the last one. That one was in complete shambles. My mental state, trying to even begin picking apart the void encounter. I didn't even know what to do. So in that time, I was struggling with, I couldn't watch football. I mean, I had completely changed. Being in Oklahoma, I'm an Oklahoma girl, and we're, cheering on our Sooners and our Cowboys, and we had the whole house divided, and I couldn't do it. The violence of slamming into each other was too much for my spirit. I couldn't listen to music anymore. I used to love heavy metal and stuff, heavy rap. I couldn't listen to any of it. It was just nature sounds or Hertz music was the only thing that my spirit could handle. And this was 2 years out. At that time, Black Lives Matter was picking up. The divisions, I couldn't watch it. It crushed my spirit to see such injustice. And I mean, you see me almost tearing up now. It was overwhelming, and it still is to some degree, to see how people treat each other, and unnecessarily just hatred and ignorance. And after existing over in the void with my own feelings and outside of that kind of environment that we're all surrounded in here on Earth, it was hard to reintegrate. It was very difficult to accept that as part of our reality. because I felt that ultimate love and connection there coming from the fabric of humanity, and that's not what I was experiencing back here on Earth. So I finally got to the point where I told my husband, look, I've got to talk to you. He was in the kitchen cooking dinner. I was sitting on the couch. Kids were sitting on the couch next to me. I didn't even care at this point. And I said, look, I died and I didn't go to heaven. And I just ugly cried for a couple of hours, explaining to him what exactly had happened and what I had been going through, what I'd been hiding, and how ashamed I was, because here I am, pastor's wife, going to the void, you know. Thankfully, my husband, I wasn't scared to tell him because I was worried about his reaction to me. I was more worried about what it would do to his faith, because he was always so very strong in his faith. And I knew what it had done to myself. I didn't know what it would do to him. And I didn't want to put him through that. But I couldn't hold it anymore. And he said, it's okay, babe. We're going to figure this out together, which was incredible, because even people that have positive or radiant near-death experiences, 80% of marriages end because people have changed so drastically due to what they've encountered. So it may have helped that I was silent for a while. He saw the changes in me, and now he understood why. And so he went on and signed us up for IONS, for their online sharing groups, and said, okay, let's do it. And it was just over Zoom. We went to that first one, and I kept turning off my camera because I was ugly crying. And I'm sitting here listening. You know, there's a group of maybe 30 people, probably 5 or 6 have had a true near-death experience where they actually had a death and dying crossing over. Others may have meditated and reached other realms, or others might have been sitting in just because they were interested. So it was a whole mix of people. But listening to the ones that were talking about their near-death experience, everyone had a radiant experience, and they were struggling with integrating those into their lives. But here I am, this horrible person with a dark encounter, and it was hard to relate. It almost made me feel worse. They were extremely understanding, compassionate. They all, you know, put up hearts and everything, and reached out their hands through the cameras, and, you know, tried to show support and love in the best way that they could. And I appreciated that. So it was nothing against IONS. It was just, I wasn't the right fit for that meeting group, I think. Which now I was so happy to see this last month. I went on and looked, and they now have a distressing near-death experience group specifically for it. And it's led by a lady named Kathy McDaniel, who had a hell experience. She was a Catholic woman that went to hell and went through several layers of it. And her story is just atrocious, what she went through and has been able to overcome. But she's the right person for that. So it was really interesting going to that meeting this last month and speaking with others who said it was horrible. You know, I was terrified, and I'm like, yes, these are my people. You know? Because it's hard whenever you're the only one going, no, I was so scared, you know, I was so alone. And then you hear other people saying it was so beautiful, and I felt unlimited love, and you can't relate. So that's become one of the things that's become very important to me. I went on to, like I said, become part of the experiencer resource team with MUFON, and a lot of the alien ET encounters, abduction encounters, they're distressing. You know, some people have wonderful encounters with the CE5 and they welcome them in, but I think that the CE5 movement would be very similar to people that are meditating their way into, you know, other realms, such as the void or whatever. It's a different level of trauma whenever you are somewhere against your will. So someone who's had a near-death encounter, who has literally gone through death and dying, and are dealing with the physical ramifications of that, they are in an environment out of their control. It's very similar to what ET encounters do to those experiencers, where they are out of control, they're removed from their environment. They can't just wake up and be unabducted. Same thing with people that have actually had the death and dying into a near-death experience. There's no escape. It is out of your control. And so that's just a whole nother level of trauma that has to be brought in and considered whenever we're looking at this. Now, on the other side of that, whenever you had a distressing encounter, a lot of times we aren't met with love and joy. Like I said, I've had Christians ask, about the state of my faith, questioning if I was saved. I was as saved as I thought I could be, So to be torn down with your character, people point fingers at you. What did you do to deserve to be there? Well, you must have done something. It's your fault. Well, why are people having wonderful encounters? What have they done? What is their fault for being there? What have they done so grand that has led them to be able to be in the lap of Jesus? I don't know. But to point fingers at someone who's had a distressing encounter, who has been torn down in every single way, trauma of the physical dying, the trauma of returning, and trying to make any sense of a spirituality that may be in shambles, to be greeted by that community, the spiritual community or religious community, neglecting you, trying to find community and solace in a group that should understand near-death experiences, only to feel neglected there because you can't identify with the radiant encounters. There are so many levels of trauma that go into people who have come back with this distressing. I had my own mother said, "What, you don't believe in Jesus now?" Hung up on. I'm going to pray for you. I had a pastor at a convention verbally attack me. Came up with a list of questions and was pointing in my face and quoting scripture, and then told me, "I'm not even going to talk to you. I don't want to hear your answer because your husband isn't in here to be able to account for why he's allowing you to speak about this."
Wow.
Oh
I was going to
gosh.
ask you, how has your faith changed as somebody who is very regimented, maybe by the book in some communities? Has faith increased, but sort of literal interpretation decreased? Like, I'm curious, how has your belief
Right.
system
That's
morphed?
the $1 million question. And I've been waiting 8 years to find out where I sit on that, because I wanted desperately to cling to my religion. That has always been my comfort. My Savior has always been my comfort, my go-to every day, every night, every waking moment. And to have lost that, I was extremely hurt that I wasn't visited, that I wasn't greeted by Christ. I mean, that took years to process. And I think now more that it was just not right for me at that time. I needed to go through this by myself. I needed to find that strength in myself. Now, when I die again, will Christ be there? Possibly, hopefully, I'm still hopeful. But at the time, that's not what I needed. I needed to reflect in myself. I needed to be able to sit in that environment and have that time out to correct my path and go on where I'm at. As far as my faith now, I will never be an atheist. I encountered the source. I sat in front of him bare, with every bit of my being exposed. It was terrifying, but I returned from it, and if I'm there again, there'll be some familiarity there. I will never question the source. The source is real. The source is there, and is responsible for everything that we encounter. So that's where that lies. As far as the Bible, I've come across some other things, and I've come across a gentleman recently with some of his teachings that finally everything clicked. And this was within the last few months. I found this, and I said, "My God, that is it. This it makes sense to me." And his name is Paul Wallace. I don't know if you ever heard of him, either of you. He works with he is he was an Anglican priest, I believe. And he worked with Mauro Biglino, who was a Vatican translator, translated 17 different books for the Vatican. And he goes down to the very root words of some of the things found in the Old Testament.
Strong's
And
Concordance type stuff.
beyond that, like, this would be the man writing that. So
Wow.
yeah. But what they've found in the Old Testament is relating it back to the Elohim. And this was things that I struggled with before even the near-death experience, where I would say, why would God say don't kill? And then here comes Moses off the mountain, and he's going, let's go slaughter all these women and children over here, you know? It didn't line up. It didn't line up with the source that I met. There was none of that in the source at all. And so trying to reconcile that with what I knew to be true now, firsthand experience of the source, there was no way that I could reconcile the violence and stuff that I saw in the Old Testament. What Paul and Mauro have brought forward makes perfect sense. I believe Billy Carson also is on that same wavelength, where they're looking more towards it being the Elohim. And these were ET encounters that were happening back in the Old Testament days. And it's reflecting what we found on the Sumerian tablets, and been able to now translate Epic and Gilgamesh. It's all there in the Bible. But if you look at them compared to the old Sumerian writings, then we're seeing that it lines up very much with this being some otherworldly kind of contact in the Old Testament, rather than the reflection of an Old Testament God or the source. The source I know very much more New Testament. And I'm getting more into religion now. I'm sorry, but it
makes sense. It makes sense. The Old Testament God is the wrathful one, vengeful one, tell you to kill your kid just to test your faith. And then you get the story of Jesus saying God is about forgiveness and love and abundance. It's not about, even the priests who were seen as holy men were gambling and casting dice and all that stuff, weren't really living the life supposed to be prescribed. And he kind of basically, he fought against the machine. He was like, this is politics. This is BS. This is not what God or source is about. This is games humans make. This isn't what the creator has made.
Well,
I do have
go ahead.
Sorry. No, I don't want to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, one of the things that Paul says is, Paul Wallace, he brings up that Jesus actually said, you're of your father, the devil. And he gives a representation of what the Old Testament God did to people. And he quotes it directly. He's like, what God would give you snakes or rocks when you say you're hungry, and so he's directly going against what the Old Testament had said. And I'm telling you, it was the first time in 8 years that something has sat right with me, that it was like, okay, this answers a lot of questions I've had for a very long time, and it makes sense. And this guy brings receipts. He's telling you the root words, the Elohim and the kavod being a spaceship, and it should have something of weight. Whereas it's normally translated as glory, as some spiritual thing, but it's normally a physical object, a kavod would be. So when God showed, or when Yahweh showed his kavod to Moses up on the mountain, and he had to hide himself behind a cliff, he was literally showing him his UFO. So these are things that I'm looking more into right now, and trying to learn more about kind of these different root words and everything, because it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I have so much. There's not even enough time to talk about a lot of the things that were mentioned. So there's a couple things that were talked about. I'm going to try to condense my response here and my question with you. So the first thing is you mentioned a lot about predetermination and the idea of heaven and hell. You did say that you struggle with whether or not you are necessarily a Christian biblically. I guess aligned with the biblical version of a Christian or whatever that might mean. And now I'm learning now about the conflict you have with the philosophy or the theories or the belief systems behind modern day Christianity versus what some of maybe the apostles were talking about. Or there's a very big difference between what the apostles said in terms of giving, for example, selling all your stuff and then sharing them amongst the people versus today's conservative Christian groups who say, hey, why are we feeding the homeless? These people, let's not worry about these people. Or why are we giving children school lunches? Because that's, they don't, need that stuff. And it's weird that there's a divide. But then when you mention the Elohim, the idea of these gods or the watchers from Enoch, the book of Enoch, the idea that there are these fallen angels or these beings, these entities that have essentially infiltrated humanity and are affecting our development and our society or civilization. This is all a part of, I believe, a big picture. And when you talk about Billy Carson, he mentions a lot of things that talk about the ancient Egyptians and religions and these different texts that reference beings that have essentially influenced humanity. So I am 100% in there with you on that one. I do want to mention something you could talk about to your people, or who these people who claim to be Christian, which I am not one to say whether or not somebody is or not. But when they don't think about the Bible and what it actually says, there's a verse, and I looked it up here real quick while I was listening to you. I believe Luke 16, verse 19 to 26, I have here. It talks about Abraham's bosom, where that beggar who was standing at the rich man's gates was asking for just a little bit to eat, and he let him die. He died with boils on his body, and he ended up going to a place called Abraham's bosom. And he was literally, at least according to the Bible's verses, being held by Abraham. And the rich man was in hell, looking up, asking for just a drop of water from his finger. And he said that there's a divide between us. It's too great. I can't even do that, even if I wanted to. And so the idea that there isn't another place that isn't where Jesus is, or Jesus doesn't greet you there, that's in the Bible. I mean, Abraham's bosom is a place, apparently, that some people have gone to according to the Old Testament. A lot of people I've learned do not read their own Bible to learn about what it actually says. And it's interesting to me because when they have such conviction about their belief systems that are contrary to what the Bible says, it makes me wonder if the influence of the Elohim, these watchers, the gods, whatever they are affecting the consciousness of a very large portion of humanity. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they've been here for a very long time. Obviously, there's a couple of different things that you threw in there. So
I know. You said so much. I tried to do this,
yeah.
But
So the Elohim, they would be the powerful ones. Yahweh was one of the most powerful. He was given dominion over the Israelites. So that is Yahweh's people. And I guess that even the Catholic Church had come out here within the last few years and said, in Christian worship, we shouldn't be referencing Yahweh. And I think they probably figured out that this isn't necessarily a Christian God. This was the Elohim of the Israelites, because it was divided up between different Elohim. And some people would refer those back to the Anunnaki that came here, that these Elohim were the Anunnaki, and they caused all kinds of wars, and
yeah, they didn't like us
they
that
were
much.
fighting between themselves. Yeah. I think whenever we look more to the spiritual side of things, Jesus said, it's very simple: love God and love others.
Yeah.
And that is very much the message I came away with. With it all wrapped up into one: love God and love others. I think that there's a divide between these different realms. I had mentioned before about almost feeling like I was inserted back into a matrix reality, where this is almost a simulation. And in my book, I talk about if you had a VR headset and you went into virtual reality and you were locked into that. You knew you had a wife and kids, you knew that you had a family and a job and a house, and you knew all of your life up until the time you put on that virtual reality headset. I felt like that's what I was locked into, because I knew my true existence over in the void, that pure existence of consciousness, and that connection that is supposed to be there with the source, with everything that I was initially cut off from. I knew that as my true existence, pure existence, and I'll return to that existence, whether it be in the void or whatever. But being back here on Earth, I literally felt like I was locked into a virtual reality, environment where I was now, forced to live out the rest of my life, which I was grateful for. I like I said, I fought like hell to get back here. But it was very different. There was something I had looked into. It's called derealization, and it can happen as a response to trauma. But I really didn't think that that's what I was going through, because derealization, you're almost like creating an environment to go to. I knew the reality of the void. I knew my existence there. So it's not like I was creating somewhere that I wanted to go. I literally had been there. I had memory of this place. It's like if I remembered a wonderful trip to Montana or something, I know Montana exists.
Yeah.
And so
A
it's
lot of
not
times
like
people
I'm
say it's more
creating
real,
this.
right?
Yeah. So that's kind of what I went through when I got back. I very much believe that heaven, hell, these different realms, I think they're different simulations that are being run by the source to be plugged into. And where I was behind that veil. I was behind the curtain with the great and powerful Oz, watching from the control room. So that's why I didn't go to another simulation. I didn't get that, virtual reality on the other side. I went to the source. I went to where it all is being projected from. And so that I think that in the end, I went to probably one of the more mysterious places that a person can go to. And was given a very, very high privilege of being there. So, yes, I was fearful at the time. But now I see the wisdom in it, and I'm grateful for it, because I can now come back here and just share that message of love each other. God is real. The source is real. And there is so much more to our existence than what we ever really want to talk about in normal day life. We're too worried about paying bills and, being a slave to the system. And,
Yeah.
we've set up this grind where we have to
Yeah.
work for 60 years, 70 years,
Right.
and we'll never be able to pay off our homes, and our children are in worse condition than even we are. And, the problems go on, and it keeps us from looking back at the true root of humanity. And sometimes we've got to slow down and do that. And I think that sometimes these little glimpses that we get from those of us who've been able to go to the other side from a near-death experience, those of us that have had encounters with ET, with other entities, non-human entities, have had abduction experiences, those all serve to work together to remind us of this greater reality that surrounds us and that we're aware of, but we have to put off in search of just survival at this point.
Yeah. I've got a few video clips I want to play here. The first one I found was fascinating was an atheist who went through a near-death experience, and then that changing their perspective on things. So let's take a look, and then we'll get everybody's thoughts.
My body, looking at my body, and there was a light leaving my body, and I just sort of said I must be dead. That was what I thought to myself. I tried to wake up my hospice caretaker who was down the hall, but of course, not having a body, that I couldn't. The minute I realized I couldn't wake up my caretaker, I ended up back in the room that my body was in, and suddenly darkness closed in all around me. And I tell you, that was the scariest feeling in the world. It felt like hell. I fell into a deep, dark hole, as it were, almost like a black hole. And it seemed like there were many others in this same hole with me. I saw a pin light of light. It was almost like a little star in the blackness, but it was so far away. But almost immediately, my life review began. And my life review for me began as almost like a holographic movie in this darkness all around me. Once I got out of what I call the hell hole or the black hole I was stuck in and did make my way to the light, it was an amazing experience because something very similar to a guardian angel actually appeared to me as I called out. And I was calling out desperately for help. And I realize now that this was the metaphor for my own higher self, was reaching out to me. The only thing I could relate to something like that at the time was an angel because of my upbringing. And it was an angel who brought me to the light. But as I went to the light or the, quote, tunnel, was part of it was going to the light and the other part of it was coming from the light. And as I was moving up, I sort of realized that the column of light going up was all the people that were dying at that time. And the other side of the same light, actually it was the same light beam, so to speak. I was moving up a light beam, so to speak. On the other side was all the souls coming in, being born.
I was rescued by the light, taken to the light, and like any good atheist that stands before the light, I immediately knew it was God. My first big question to the light that I perceived as God, and I won't even go into how the light feels because you know it and you've talked about it a lot. It's fantastic. My first question to the light was, why is humanity so dark and doomed? Why was this ever created? At that moment, the light breathed me into it, and suddenly I found myself in a mandala. Is the only thing I can tell you it looked like, an endless mandala of living human souls, of all the human souls that had ever existed. And in that mandala of human souls, I could look into every human soul. And you may not believe this, but I had a look in all of your souls too. All of you were there, every human soul that had ever been. And in that, I could see no evil, no darkness whatsoever. And then I was shown my soul, and there was no darkness, nothing that I suspected. It was not there. It was all an illusion. And in that moment, it was like an atom bomb went off, and everything that I ever knew was obliterated. And then these souls, and it was all of you too, gave me life again. These souls gave my soul life again. And in that, my soul was reborn. I had never received such love in my life as I received in the mandala of human souls with the light. I keep that love alive in my heart forever.
The eighth chakra is the ultraviolet chakra. And that's the chakra of purification. That happens when you finish your life review and you go to the light, you pass through what's called the eighth chakra, which is purification, because there's nothing in this world that you could ever do that will taint the oversoul, that will taint your soul. Nothing you will ever do, not even Adolf Hitler was tainted once he went through the light. And that's why the more you resist giving up what you might call darkness, the harder it is to get to the light. I know, I was one of those. I was stuck to my darkness until I learned to forgive myself and forgive my life and love my life. In fact, I came back praying, I love my life, I love my life. And when my caretaker found me on the floor, I was talking in a low voice, and she said, I put my ear to your lips, and you were saying, I love my life, I love my life. What I learned, and what I believe to this day, is that the physical body that we live in actually gives us the most beautiful vehicle ever imagined to experience time and space, and to experience the universe in ways that cannot be experienced while you're in spirit. It's great to have organs, believe me. When you're on the other side, you don't have organs. And there may be people here that think they're in pain, that are in pain, that think their life is not anything like they want. But I tell you, I have met people that would give you anything for the worst day of your life. because even the worst day of your life is so filled with potential.
So a lot of similarities, right? The void, the sort of simulation, the mandala, the knowing, the surprise that it's not anything like I thought it would be. It wasn't discernible.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think
I
about
know.
what he was saying?
I'm blown away. I'm really fascinated with the mandala that, a lot of what he said is actually very similar to what I wrote in the book about what the fabric of humanity was, that it was a harmony of souls. There's the cover
This
of
is your
it.
book right here. Yeah, Dying to Meet Them. One Woman's Incredible Journey from NDE to UAP by our friend Mindy Tautfest. That's a fascinating read. I did not read it all. I will be honest. I will admit, but from what I did read, it's very interesting. I wanted to give it its due justice, and I didn't want to skim it because I know it's quality. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah,
And I thank you for sharing that video because really I hadn't heard that one. Was that Kenneth Storm or?
I'm not sure. It was just entitled. It was on TikTok, and it was just
Yeah.
entitled "An Atheist's Near-Death Experience in His
He
Own
sounds
Words."
really familiar. Yeah, he sounds really familiar. That voice.
Yeah.
That voice.
But yeah, the fact that he went into this mandala that sounds very, very much like my fabric of humanity. I think I glimpsed it from the outside. And the fact that you said that he found faith out of that, it's beautiful. I don't like people thinking that I've lost my faith or anything. My faith is transformed, which I just don't know how it could not be. So it seems like he's also transformed and gained a greater. There's no way you could be an atheist, like I said, after going through that, and you've met the source. You know that there's purpose for your life, and there's reason for you to be here. And you're returned with that mission to get on with it.
And the spirit guide too. He mentioned having some entity to be there that heard his calling for help, heard his distress, similar to your experience. Only then did it intervene and say, "Hey, like it's okay. You got this. It won't be forever."
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities there. I thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard that one before. I know I was scrolling TikTok a couple of years ago, and someone had done one of those little AI things where it said, tell it to draw the void. And it did. I actually have it saved on my computer, and it's part of my slideshow when I give presentations about the book. But it did. It built the void. It showed the fabric of humanity. It showed the dark box I was in with the person standing over it. When the first time I saw that, I said, how in the world can that exist over here? That an AI could draw something so similar to what I described. I mean, I would say it would be about a 90% hit on everything that I experienced over there. So that kind of just blew me away.
Have you seen the AI universe one? A guy's prompting it says, show me the universe. And it's like a whole bunch of stars. He's like, no, zoom out. And then it's like clusters of galaxies, like zoom out more, zoom out more.
Yes, I did see that one.
Going, and it turns into DNA at like the outside of the universe level. It looks like a DNA helix according to what AI envisions. It's fascinating.
Yeah. It reminds you of like the end of Men in Black, where it zooms out and it's the marble, everything. So, but yeah, I mean, there's so many overlaps between the UFO phenomena and the near-death phenomena. And that's another thing I get into later in the book is some of the research that was put out by Dr. Kenneth Ring, who joined with him and Raymond Moody, Bruce Grayson, and then Michael Sabom. And they're the ones that actually created ions to, help near-death experiencers. I really related with Dr. Ring, and he's become a very good friend of mine since writing the book, because we both saw I had started seeing kind of the similarities between the near-death experiencers and the UFO experiencers when I was working with people on the ERT. And I said, someone smarter than me has got to have seen, some kind of similarity like I'm seeing. If there is one there, someone's seen it. And it was Dr. Ken Ring. He had done a whole series. He was a professor of psychology at the University of Connecticut back in the late 80s, early 90s, whenever he put together the study. He was studying near-death experiences, and a colleague said, "You need to look at communion. This guy sounds a lot like your near-death experiencers." And so he read through it and he said, "You're darn right. Let's look into this." So they put through a whole test, talked to near-death experiencers and UFO experiencers, and he found a list of commonalities between a encounter-prone personality and then a set of after effects, which is found in both sets of experiencers. And that's more of what I had been noticing, was those after effects. So, I mean, we're seeing that a lot of these phenomena overlap and line up. And I think that it has a lot to do with the structure of our reality, and kind of the things that these different types of experiencers have been through, where they've been removed from their environment and are thrust into these different scenarios that are outside of our normal operation. So it affects us not just mentally, but I mean, even physiologically, with, lights turning off and, street lights going out.
Yeah.
I blew up a couple of microwaves. I fried a few laptops. The list goes on. And the hypersensitivity, emotional hypersensitivity, and even just hypersensitivity to noises and lights and whatnot. There's a lot of things that we see that run concurrently between both types of experiencers. So there's still so much work to be done, but Dr. Ring was on a good, I mean, he was well ahead of his time with the things that he was looking into. And now we're finally seeing a lot of people coming out in droves looking into consciousness and just how it runs between all of these different phenomena.
Yeah, I was thinking about the movie Contact with Jodie Foster at the very end, whenever she saw her father, and it was a depiction of her father, and he was on this beach. This is after they built after the signal gave them instructions on how to build this machine to contact them, and he grabs a handful of sand, and this is my memory of this moment. And the sand is, as it's falling through his fingers, he says, "You humans are, kind of holding on to this kind of frivolous way of life." And that's kind of the depiction that I get of this, not necessarily a void, but a place, I don't know, like a place between. It's not just, it may be when we die, and this is just my thought, and I'm curious about your perspective on this. The part of us that still exists afterwards goes somewhere. Maybe because we're obviously going somewhere. People are going somewhere. They're experiencing something. Whatever this experience is, it's located somewhere. I don't know how else to say it, but it may not be, where we experience space and time. It may be something extra dimensional or interdimensional, or, outside of time and space, but still a place of some type. That's kind of my impression of what that void might be. And it may be different for each person, maybe.
Well, I think you're correct that, like I had said, I think they're different simulations. Now, what happens once you cross that threshold? I have no clue. I haven't been there.
Yeah.
I haven't been there yet. So, what happens after final death? Do we go reside in heaven? Do we go reside in a hell? Do we go reside on another planet and we're kind of recycled, or are we reborn here? I get asked a lot about reincarnation, and I don't know. I don't have any memory of reincarnation. I wasn't shown a past life or anything. So I really wouldn't know how to weigh in on that more than anybody else. But, I think that these are different dimensional things that we're seeing. And I think some of the ET craft and whatnot are interdimensional, extra dimensional, inner earth. We can go down that whole rabbit hole. But, I know that, and I have to give the little disclaimer here that MUFON doesn't subscribe to anything, any particular route for these coming from, but Mindy Tautfest does. So, and I think that it's coming from several different places. But anytime that I'm speaking of my experiences and relating it to anything that I've done with MUFON, I have to be very clear that MUFON is very open as far as what these could represent. I tend to look more into the interdimensional side of things, because I think that there's been a connection maintained with that source consciousness that they're able to manipulate. And we've got to get back to integrating spirit into science, because we have separated those two out, and it's done us a great disservice. We've heard that a lot of the craft are flying, have been flown using consciousness, that it's controlled with their minds. Either we have that kind of technology, or we're still continuing to ignore it. But that's when real breakthroughs are going to come, is once we can reintegrate that spirit, the energy of spirit, with our science, instead of saying, this is physical over here, and then the spiritual we'll put over here with the church. We've got to bring those back together if we ever want to move forward.
When you mentioned science, I wanted to get a clip from somebody prominent in the science world, just sort of on their take on NDE. So I've got one here from Neil deGrasse Tyson. So let's take a look.
When people have these near-death experiences, okay, or one where they're dying on a table, and they commonly described, they leave their body and they look back on themselves, okay? That's a thing going, that's something, okay?
Right.
Let's investigate this. The test for whether you really left your body or whether you were hallucinating it, get some writing that faces the ceiling up above your body. And if you're floating above your body, above that piece of paper, when you come back to life, you should be able to say what's written on that piece of paper. And that is yet to happen.
Sometimes he's a hard guy to like. I mean, I like him as a storyteller and as a physicist, but I can't talk aliens or God with the man, because I would punch him in the face. We joked on another episode that Marquis and I
hold on.
We
did not, just to be clear, we did not joke about that. I only went along with your scenario. I'm not going to let my friend get beat up by a giant, physicist. So
yeah, if I were to instigate a fight with Neil deGrasse Tyson, you would be obliged to help me. And the method we would do that would probably involve a third party, right? You grab the arms, I grab the legs. He's a big guy. But I think that's oversimplified, right? Like, write something on a paper, and if you can't remember what was written on the paper, you're hallucinating. Like, that's
as if people know when they're going to die. Like, that's a ridiculous. Yeah.
But I've got to agree with the man. I think that there are scientific ways to be able to produce results. I know I've heard of that before. I don't know if someone, I guess he's saying now that no one's ever been able to do it. It would be a matter of being able to line it up right at the right time and saying, hey, if anything happens, make sure you look
but
down.
what about people that cross over during an operation? They see the operation, they hear the doctors talking about golfing on Sunday and random stuff they would never normally know, or astrally going someplace, witnessing something that is impossible for them to know. Like, I get it. It's just based on what somebody says. But if the data says they have info they shouldn't, you can't really throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's got to be something to it.
Right. But we have to also, there has to be science behind it. Yes, I, being a nurse, absolutely, I want some science behind it. If I could provide you with science behind everything I'm saying, I absolutely would. And I hope that Neil would go on to try to devise different experiments to be able to, prove that these are real once and for all. And we're getting closer and closer every day with some of the studies that they're doing now in consciousness and trying to transfer it over to, other animals. And I mean, we're doing all kinds of incredible stuff in science today. It's only a matter of time before we are able to bring back things and say, okay, yeah, this kind of proves they did go to the other side. Now we know that, people can die and come back. We're able to resuscitate people at greater and greater lengths than we've ever been able to do before. So that's, the study of near-death experiences is only 50, 60 years old, that it's really been brought to the forefront with Moody and his book. So we've got a long way to go. And I, for one, am grateful for people like Neil that are looking at ways. How can we prove it? We need both sides. yes, it's good to listen to near-death experiencers and what we have to say because we've been there, but then we also need that science to back it up. It's the same thing that I do with MUFON. I listen to my experiencers, what they've gone through, but I also go through a series of checks to make sure that, hey, if they got abducted and they have a picture of the craft, I'm going to go through and try to rule out every airplane. I'm going to try to rule out every rocket. I'm going to try to rule out every satellite. I'm going to try to rule out every planet and star that was, everything. I'm going to go through my entire checklist so it validates. I can do the photo and video analysis on this, that if they turn it in, I can pull the EXIF data. I can see the exact time and date and location if they have that turned on. And all the pertinent information surrounding their encounter. And that I'm doing my due diligence to be able to look at it and go, there is no explanation for what this picture that you're showing me. And that lends credibility more so to their extraordinary encounter with an abduction than if I would have just gone, okay, yeah, I believe you. So we need the science to back it up. And we'll get there one day. But it may be a slow climb, but we're doing enough studies now into consciousness and whatnot that we're getting closer.
And it gets rid of the debunkers, right? Now they have to debunk real science, not just somebody's account or anecdotal evidence. If you provide real data, it's like, okay, now you need better data to say this is BS. It can't just be your opinion anymore that person's lying.
Right.
It's a whole new set of metrics that you have to combat now, right?
Yeah.
And to be clear, like Neil in Louis' defense, Neil tends to dismiss, he tends to disregard, he tends to mock, and kind of like I think he's not being genuine with his approach to these kind of conversations. He doesn't think about them critically at all. He actually suggests not looking at the data because he doesn't think the data is even worth looking at. He disputes a lot of the experts, like the pilots who talked about seeing the UAP and UFOs or whatever. He disputes even their credibility. These pilots who've been pilots for decades, who've been highly respected and trained, and he doesn't have a respectful approach to those kind of things. However, I do agree. The Soul Foundation has done this with Gary Nolan in the collection of scientists who, Diana Pasulka and Jacques Vallée's been doing. He's the guy who developed what was, I believe, the precursor to the internet or something like that. So there is scientists who are looking at these phenomena, all of them collectively, by the way, as something that is unified, that they're connected in some way, from a scientific perspective. We just saw that Soul Conference where there was a series of scientists talking about that. So there are scientists out there. They are not doing what Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing, though. Just to be clear about that.
Yeah, Neil is not a full science body. Neil is just Neil.
Well, you have to extend some grace because it's outside of his sphere of experience. Right. It's somewhere that he's not comfortable operating, and that's okay. We need these naysayers. We need people to keep us genuine and on track. And it drives those of us like myself to do better on our side to be able to prove that it is a worthy thing to look into. Which I think most of the population has caught on to now, that yes, UAP are real. Yes, we know that we can bring people back from the dead. So we know that these are real things. Maybe Neil's just not there. And of course, it's not good to antagonize people or to call in, to put people down or their reputations. I can't support that. But to genuinely question from a scientific perspective, we need it. We need both sides of the aisle because it pushes us to be better and to do better, to prove from our side of things that these are worthy causes to look into. Hopefully one day he'll get there.
Yeah, for sure. Before we close out, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can learn more about you, if they want to follow you. Again, the book is Dying to Meet Them, probably available everywhere fine books are sold. But tell the audience where they can follow Mindy.
Yeah, they can reach me on my website, mindytautfest.com. It's MindyTautfest.com. And there's a link to the book on there. There's also a link to all of the Hayden Hughes International UFO Bureau, which I'm the curator of, and has some good information on like Heaven's Gate, whenever he did his investigation with them, the Aurora crash, things going on in Hartshorn. I mean, all the incredible investigations that he was part of and that we're kind of carrying on with, especially with the Hartshorn stuff. That's where the big schoolyard encounter took place. That was case of the year for MUFON in 2021 that I investigated. So there's information on that. On the book page, there is a playlist of songs that really kind of people like music to help set the tone. That's the music that completely spoke to me during the writing of the book and kind of reliving my encounter. And then if they want to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me through that website or through my email, which is mindy.mufonok@gmail.com. Books available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just anywhere online.
Well, and you mentioned that Hertz music. Our previous episode was on binaural beats, brainwave entrainment, using these sort of ethereal sounds to align your brain and evoke change, relaxation, better sleep, clairvoyance, whatever. So it's cool to hear that you utilize that in your life practice.
Well, maybe next time we can talk about the experiments that the U.S. government was doing back in 1983 with analysis and assessment of gateway process. And they were
like
actually
a part two.
They were trying to reach the
great.
absolute, which
great.
sounds a heck of a lot like the void whenever you read their write-up of it. So
Right.
they were trying to send psychic spies over there to get information from exactly where I was.
Yeah,
So,
the whole Project Stargate, right? Remote viewing, all of that.
Yep,
It overlapped
it
into the
plays
same
into all
thing.
of it. Yep.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. We'll definitely set that up. Thank you so much, Mindy. Your story is amazing.
Absolutely.
It's detailed and in such a way that it's unique. I've never heard certain elements of it. It makes a lot of sense. I think if I had gone through the same thing in the exact same condition, I'd probably come out feeling the same way too. So good for you for still having some spirituality about you, but being more down to earth and real. And like, let's erase the nonsense. Let's just look at the data and let's form opinions based on good stuff, not conditioning that we've had, since we were a kid. So good on you. Thank you for doing what you do. And you're welcome back here anytime.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. And I had so much fun with you guys tonight. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. And we will do a part 2. And thank you, everybody that was in our chat room tonight and joining us for all of our shows. We do really appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up if you like our episode and join our Quantum Club. The link's in the description. You can join for free. There's free content as well as some paid content. But either way, we want you to be in the club. We like to be able to share some extra stuff. We record another mini episode at the end of every full length episode. So I think we've got like 30 extra episodes on there right now. We just love doing this. There's no commercials in our show. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And it's that time, Marquise, to cue our epic music, brother. So on behalf of our esteemed guest, Mindy Tautfest, my co-host, Marquise Williams, and myself, Louis Borges, thank you all for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care of each other, and bye for now.